The desert hides everything: dust, secrets, bodies. When FBI agent Carter Reed, a young idealist on his first undercover mission, arrives in the quiet border town of Echo Ridge, Arizona, he expects routine surveillance. Instead, he uncovers a nightmare wrapped in silence, a town ruled by fear, and a sheriff whose badge is only a mask for something far darker. Every street corner watches him. Every voice whispers. Every report he sends vanishes into the void. As the line between law and corruption dissolves, Carter is betrayed by his own agency and branded a criminal, hunted, framed, left for dead. But the truth refuses to die. With the help of fearless journalist Maya Sanders, he fights back the only way left, by turning his investigation into a live broadcast seen around the world. One man's story ignites a revolution of truth that can't be silenced. They built a system on fear. He will burn it down with proof. From the silence of the desert to the blinding glare of the cameras, Echo Ridge is a battle between loyalty and justice, between survival and redemption, because sometimes the only way to serve the law is to break it. The desert looked endless from the highway miles of ochre dust, sun-bleached billboards, and the occasional skeleton of a saguaro stretching thin arms toward a cloudless sky. Carter Reed kept his hands steady on the steering wheel of the old Freightliner, sunglasses cutting the glare. The truck's air conditioning had died an hour ago, and sweat soaked through the collar of his denim shirt. He didn't mind. It helped to sell the cover. On paper, he was a 25-year-old independent hauler running shipments between Tucson and the Mexican border. In truth, he was Special Agent Carter Reed, newly assigned to the FBI's Southwest Corruption Task Unit. Echo Ridge, Arizona population just over 11,000, was his first solo field assignment. A quiet town, they'd told him, a place where nothing happened. But the Bureau's statistics told another story. Missing migrant cases, misreported seizures, untraceable wire transfers. It was the kind of place where silence had a price. He arrived at dusk. The welcome sign read, Echo Ridge, safe, strong, proud. The words looked harmless until you noticed the fresh coat of paint covering older graffiti beneath. The main street stretched 3 blocks long. A diner, a church, a pawn shop, and the sheriff's office squatting at the end like a fortress. Carter parked behind a gas station, shut off the engine, and let the heat press in on him. He reminded himself of the briefing, stay low, keep the accent mild, never mention federal work. The Bureau's contact had already rented him a trailer at the edge of town. He was just another working man passing through. Inside the diner, everyone looked when he walked in. It wasn't hostility exactly, more like curiosity sharpened by years of habit. Outsiders stood out here. A waitress with sunburned arms filled his coffee without asking what he wanted. "You knew?" she asked. "Just passing through," he said with a smile. "You'll be back," she answered, half smiling, half warning. "Everyone comes back." He watched the locals in the reflection of the window while pretending to read a menu. 2 uniformed deputies sat near the door, sidearms heavy on their hips, their laughter just a little too loud. The older one, silver hair cropped military style, had the swagger of a man used to being obeyed, Sheriff Ray Gray. The file photo hadn't done him justice. The man radiated confidence, or maybe arrogance so pure it looked like charm. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent light, a small sun on his chest. Gray noticed the stranger watching and raised his mug in greeting. Carter nodded back, calm, polite. The first rule of undercover work: never be the most interesting person in the room. After dinner, he drove to the trailer park on the outskirts. The trailer assigned to him was small, 2 rooms, 1 flickering ceiling fan, but it gave him privacy. He unpacked slowly, setting up the equipment disguised as a trucker's CB radio and a cracked laptop that hid a federal-grade uplink. He placed micro cameras inside his vehicle and under the mirror facing the street. The technology was simple compared to the human part, learning when to listen, when to disappear. Night dropped fast over the desert. Crickets sang somewhere beyond the highway. Carter reviewed his notes, names, rumors, connections. Sheriff Gray's department had an unusually high number of discretionary impounds vehicles, seized from migrants, never returned, no paperwork. Local businesses owned by Hispanic families reported inspection fees that weren't on any city ledger. It all pointed to an organized system, not random abuse. And the sheriff had been in office 17 years. The next morning, Carter joined the routine of the town. He fueled the truck at Martin's Gas, the only station within 20 miles. The attendant, a teenager with earbuds, barely looked up. A patrol SUV rolled in, lights off, 2 deputies inside. They eyed him the way predators note a new scent. Carter nodded casually, wiped his hands, and drove off. He spent the week mapping Echo Ridge. Every night he wrote reports encrypted and transmitted through the uplink at low bandwidth so they blended with normal cell traffic. He logged patterns. The sheriff's daily visit to the bank right after noon, the convoys heading south on Thursdays and returning light on Fridays, the warehouse on Mesa Road with cameras facing inward instead of out. He didn't have proof yet, only fragments that hinted at something bigger. By the end of week 2, he'd made himself a fixture. Locals knew him as CJ, the quiet trucker who paid in cash and kept to himself. He bought beer at the grocery, fixed his own tires, and helped an elderly couple push a stalled pickup off the road. Trust, even casual, built slowly in small towns. Then came his first real lead. A stormy Thursday night, he parked near the freight yard pretending to nap in his cab. Through binoculars, he saw 2 deputies offload passengers from a van. Latino men and women, wrists zip-tied, no paperwork, no processing. They were herded into the same warehouse he'd marked earlier. Carter recorded the whole thing on the truck's dash cam, heart pounding. Trafficking, maybe forced labor. It fit the pattern. He waited until the vehicles left, then slipped around back on foot. The door was locked with a heavy chain. Through a broken vent, he saw rows of cots and plastic water jugs. The smell of bleach drifted out. He took photos, time-stamped them, and left before dawn. The evidence was strong enough to trigger the Bureau's next stage surveillance authorization. But when he transmitted the files, the acknowledgement didn't come. Usually it took seconds. This time nothing. He resent the packet. Still nothing. The silence on the encrypted line made the hairs on his neck stand up. The following day, Gray appeared at his truck stop table, as if they were old friends. "Heard you're hauling south tomorrow," the sheriff said, setting his coffee on Carter's map. "Mind if I ask what you're carrying?" "Machine parts," Carter replied easily. "Interesting. Don't see many haulers your age running solo. You from Tucson?" "Further east," Carter said. "Just trying to keep busy." Gray smiled, slow and deliberate. "Busy's good. Folks who get bored out here start asking questions. That's when they find trouble." It was friendly talk delivered like a warning. Gray left $1 on the counter and walked out, boots echoing against the tile. Carter watched him go, pulse steady but cold. The sheriff already suspected him. He'd have to move faster. That night he recorded another entry. The camera captured his reflection in the trailer window. City lights faint on his dark skin, eyes tired but unbroken. "Day 12, he said quietly. "Target is aware of my presence. Corruption deeper than projected. Locals too scared to speak, proceeding with caution." He paused, listening to the desert wind rattle the tin siding. "They built a wall of silence here. I'm going to find the cracks." Days blurred into weeks. Each piece of evidence, an overheard call, a falsified receipt added weight to the case. But isolation began to eat at him. The people who smiled in daylight turned away at night. Once, he found the tires of his truck slashed. Another time, a note under his door. "Go home, driver." The handwriting was neat, almost polite. Carter didn't go home. Instead, he drove the back roads until sunrise, memorizing routes, exits, the rhythm of the place. He learned where the sheriff's patrols never went, the old copper mines, the dry riverbeds used by migrants crossing north. He realized Echo Ridge wasn't just corrupt. It was built to hide corruption. Every business, every badge, every handshake fed the same machine. On the 20th day, he met a man named Miguel working at a tire shop. Miguel recognized the trucker's CB radio model, one only law enforcement used years ago. The man hesitated before speaking. "You're not what you say," he whispered. "Careful. They watch everyone." That night, the shop burned down. No casualties. Official cause, electrical fault. Carter stopped sleeping. By the end of the month, he had enough for an indictment video. names, bank transfers. But without internal authorization, his evidence was just data sitting on a disk. And the silence from headquarters continued. No one answered his coded check-ins. No one sent new orders. He began to suspect what he wouldn't dare say aloud. Someone in his own chain was compromised. The proof came the next morning when he found his trailer door ajar. Nothing stolen, just moved. His files rearranged. The message was clear: they'd been inside and they wanted him to know it. On the kitchen counter lay his bureau-issued badge, something he kept locked away, now resting openly like a threat. Beneath it, a single bullet. He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked it up, dropped it into a glass of water, and turned on the camera. "Day 31, he said softly. "They know who I am." Outside, the sun rose over Echo Ridge, washing the desert gold. The town looked peaceful again, church bell ringing, kids biking down Main Street, the sheriff's cruiser parked where it always was. But beneath that stillness, Carter could feel the machinery turning, quiet and deliberate, the kind that chewed up people and erased them. He zipped his duffel bag, checked the small recorder hidden in his belt, and looked at his reflection one last time. "If I go down," he muttered, "I'm taking them with me." Then he walked out into the heat, heading straight toward the sheriff's office. Morning settled over Echo Ridge like a low fever, thick and breathless, the kind of desert heat that made the horizon wobble. Carter Reed walked the 2 blocks from his trailer to the diner, the same route he had taken every day since he'd arrived. Nothing had changed in appearance, the same dusty windows, the same sagging awning, but he felt the difference in how people looked at him. Faces turned away faster now. Conversation stopped when he passed. Something had shifted, and everyone seemed to know something he didn't. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee he didn't really want. The waitress didn't make small talk this time. She set down the cup and hurried away, her shoulders tight, her eyes fixed on anything that wasn't him. Through the diner's window, he saw the sheriff's cruiser parked outside again, idling. Gray sat behind the wheel, sunglasses on, smiling faintly. The man didn't wave this time. He didn't need to. The message was clear enough. Carter took a slow sip of the bitter coffee and waited until the cruiser rolled away. In his trailer later, he wrote up a report that no one would read. "Subject appears to have identified agent," he said into the recorder. "Local population displaying increased anxiety and avoidance behavior. Possible intimidation campaign. Continuing observation." He stopped, hesitated, then switched off the recorder. For the first time since this assignment began, he didn't trust that his reports were going anywhere safe. The silence from the bureau had become too deliberate. No acknowledgments, no updates, no instructions. He was on his own. Still, the investigation had to continue. If he stopped moving, he'd be exposed completely. He drove to the county records office under the guise of renewing his freight license. The clerk, a weary woman with nicotine-stained fingers, pretended not to recognize the fear in her own voice as she explained that some of the town's financial archives were temporarily inaccessible. Her eyes darted to the security camera mounted above the counter. Carter thanked her politely, left the building, and walked straight to the back alley. The office lights flickered as he passed a dumpster. Inside it, he noticed the torn remnants of shredded ledgers, the fiscal year's receipts, property fees, and audit stamps. Everything that could tie the sheriff's department to money laundering was being erased. That evening, the wind picked up, blowing dust across the trailer park. Carter sat outside with his notebook, pretending to check his truck's tires while watching the road. 2 deputies drove past slowly, their patrol lights flashing for no reason. They circled the park twice before finally leaving. When he went back inside, the message light on his phone was blinking. Unknown number. He pressed play. A single voice filled the room, deep, casual, the sound of someone who smiled while speaking. "Evening, trucker. Heard you've been asking questions about things that don't concern you. Word of advice, keep your head down. Keep hauling. Echo Ridge don't like troublemakers." Then silence. Carter sat very still. He deleted the message but knew that deleting didn't erase its meaning. It was a warning, a casual one, the kind meant to unsettle without overt threat. He thought of the shredded ledgers, the clerk's trembling hands, and the way everyone's eyes slid away from his. The town wasn't just afraid of Sheriff Gray. They were conditioned to fear him. Years of quiet coercion had taught them that resistance came with a cost. He decided to visit the freight yard again after dark. The warehouse looked empty from the outside, but faint light pulsed behind the high windows. He crept closer, keeping to the shadows, the desert air dry and electric around him. Through a gap in the metal siding, he saw figures moving. 2 deputies, maybe 3 carrying boxes, to a truck marked as municipal supplies. He zoomed in with his camera. The labels were from federal shipments, emergency relief packages that should have gone to migrant shelters. They were stealing from the government itself. He documented everything until the batteries in his camera began to blink red. At dawn, he returned to the diner to keep up appearances. Sheriff Gray was already there, laughing with the same deputies Carter had filmed hours earlier. When he walked in, the laughter stopped. Gray gestured for him to join them. "CJ, right? Sit down, son. Let's have a word." The tone was friendly, but it had an edge that made Carter's pulse quicken. He slid into the booth opposite the sheriff. Gray leaned back, eyes hidden behind reflective lenses. "Heard you've been poking around the freight yard. That's restricted property. Dangerous out there at night. Rattlesnakes, coyotes. You never know what might happen." Carter smiled faintly. "Appreciate the concern, Sheriff. I just like to drive when it's cool." "Cool's relative," Gray said, stirring his coffee. "Some folks think they can come down here and change things that don't need changing." "You know what happens to them?" Carter met his gaze calmly. "They leave, I suppose." "That's right." Gray smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "They leave." The sheriff stood, tossed a bill onto the table, and clapped Carter lightly on the shoulder. The touch was firm enough to feel like possession. When Gray and his deputies walked out, the diner's low murmur of conversation didn't resume for a long time. Carter left town limits that afternoon, driving his truck south under the pretense of a delivery run. 20 miles out, he pulled into a gas station and parked behind a line of freight containers. He took out the encrypted laptop, bypassed the usual relay, and rerouted through a private satellite channel reserved for emergencies. The connection was weak, but it worked. He uploaded the night's footage and tagged it for immediate review by the Bureau's Corruption Division. Then he waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. No response. The status bar flickered, then froze. Transmission failed. Something was blocking him, either interference or deliberate jamming. He rebooted the system, tried again. Same result. He leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at the cracked windshield. If the sheriff's reach extended to digital interference, that meant someone with real resources was protecting him. A local cop couldn't do that. This was bigger than Echo Ridge. The realization sat heavy on him as he returned to town. He stopped at the small grocery on Main Street for supplies, and the clerk wouldn't meet his eyes. The receipt printer jammed twice, as if nervous too. Outside, the sun glared so hard it turned everything white. Across the street, the sheriff's cruiser was parked again, empty but present, like a ghost keeping watch. That night he couldn't sleep. He walked the length of the trailer park barefoot, the metal ground hot even after sunset. He counted 5 streetlights. 2 were out, 1 flickered, 2 were steady. A pattern. Every time he reached the second light, he heard a soft hum and idling car, headlights off. He turned quickly, and it drove away. The next morning, a dead coyote lay across his doorstep, its throat cut clean. He buried it behind the trailer before sunrise, hands shaking, though the rest of him felt hollow. When he washed the dirt off, he saw the reflection of his own face in the window. Young, exhausted, still pretending not to be afraid. He whispered to himself, "They're testing you. Don't blink." Over the following days, he noticed how thorough the system was. Restaurants served deputies first, no matter how many customers waited. Business owners smiled too quickly when Gray walked in. The pastor at Sunday service thanked the sheriff publicly for keeping the peace. Even the children playing outside the schoolyard stopped their games when they saw a cruiser drive by. Fear was woven into the daily rhythm, invisible but absolute. Carter started documenting everything beyond the criminal activity, the social habits, the control tactics, the ways silence became self-preservation. He realized that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. He needed testimony. But getting anyone to talk was nearly impossible. One evening while he was refueling at the gas station, the attendant finally spoke. A thin man named Luis, probably mid-40s, with grease under his nails and a tremor in his hands. He looked around before whispering, "You should leave." Please, we know who you are. Carter stayed quiet, letting the man speak. You're not the first. 2 years ago, a woman came from Phoenix, said she was writing about police corruption. She disappeared after a week. Nobody looked. What happened to her? Carter asked softly. Luis shook his head. People say she ran, but we know better. Sheriff said she was a drunk. End of story. He controls the stories here. Then he turned away and refused to talk again. Driving back to his trailer, Carter felt the weight of the man's words. He thought of the other investigators, those who had come before and vanished. Their cases buried, their names forgotten. If he failed, he'd be one more ghost added to the silence. Later that night, his radio crackled to life. It wasn't the bureau frequency, it was local dispatch, an open channel. He heard Gray's voice giving orders. Keep eyes on the black Freightliner, plate 6AZTD91. Driver's under suspicion. Don't stop him yet, just make sure he knows we're watching. The channel clicked off. Carter stared at the radio, the realization hitting hard. They weren't even pretending anymore. He packed his duffel bag with essentials. Files, spare clothes, the encrypted drives. He needed leverage, something that could break the sheriff's shield. The financial trail that was the key. Every corrupt system left one. He remembered the clerk at the records office, the ledgers that had been destroyed. But maybe not all of them. Maybe something survived. At sunrise, he returned to town hall. The building looked harmless, white paint peeling, flag flapping in the wind. But the air inside was stale, heavy. He walked straight to the archive room, pretending to be on an inspection. The door wasn't locked. Inside, he found boxes stacked to the ceiling. Most were empty, but in the back corner, he spotted a single ledger marked Municipal Fund, 2019. He opened it. Half the pages were torn out, but what remained showed cash withdrawals labeled Community Outreach. The amounts were enormous, inconsistent, and signed by both the sheriff and the mayor. He photographed every page until he heard footsteps in the hall. Quickly, he hid the ledger behind a loose panel in the wall and slipped out through the side door. He made it to his truck just as two deputies entered the building. His heart hammered, but he kept his face blank as he drove away. Back in his trailer, he transferred the photos to the secure drive and hid the copy behind the air vent. He looked around the small, stifling space that had become both his home and his cage. Outside, the sun blazed over Echo Ridge, indifferent. He knew what came next. Gray would tighten the noose. He would push harder, maybe even arrest him under false charges. That was how systems like this defended themselves through control, humiliation, and spectacle. He stood at the window, watching dust swirl across the road. Somewhere down that road, the freight yard slept behind locked gates. Somewhere deeper still, people lived in cages built from fear. Carter clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. He couldn't run, not yet. Not when he finally understood what he was fighting. Echo Ridge wasn't a corrupt town, it was a conquered one. And the man who conquered it ruled not with guns, but with belief. The belief that resistance was pointless. Carter knew that to break such a system, he would have to shatter that belief first. He turned back to his desk, switched on the recorder, and began to speak. Day 39. I have proof of financial manipulation involving Sheriff Gray and the mayor's office. Locals are terrified, conditioned to compliance. I can't reach headquarters. Assuming interference at the regional level, proceeding independently. He stopped, exhaled slowly, then added, I'm going to make them talk. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the desert. The first storm of the season was coming, carrying dust and change in its wake. Carter closed his notebook, feeling the pulse of it in the air, the same rhythm that told him this quiet war was only beginning. He didn't yet know how deep the corruption ran, only that it had already swallowed everything around him. But as the first drops of rain hit the trailer roof, he made himself a promise. They could own the town. They could control the story. But they would never own the truth, and he was done hiding. The rain that came that night was short-lived, but it left Echo Ridge steaming in the morning light, a town half washed and half suffocating. The storm had scrubbed the streets, but not the tension that hung in the air. Carter Reed woke before dawn, restless, every muscle wired with the knowledge that the noose was tightening. The sound of dripping water from the trailer's gutter tapped out a rhythm that matched his pulse. He brewed the last of his coffee and sat at the table, staring at the files he had collected, the photographs, the ledgers, the names. Evidence, yes. But evidence meant nothing if there was no one left to receive it. The Bureau was silent. His reports disappeared into a void, and the town was beginning to close around him. He left early, driving into town under the pretext of delivering spare parts to the sheriff's motor pool. The deputies let him through, nodding with false politeness. Gray wasn't in the office yet, which gave Carter a few precious minutes to move. He slipped a flash drive into the desk of one of the secretaries, a decoy, containing nothing but routine freight logs. Then made his way to the records room to retrieve the hidden ledger he'd stashed behind the wall panel days before. When he pried the panel loose, the space was empty. The ledger was gone. He stood still, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the faint click of typewriter keys from another room. Someone had found it. Someone new. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Sheriff Gray stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, smile slow and cold. "Morning, CJ. Early bird today, huh?" Carter's mind raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Thought I'd get ahead on the work." Gray sipped his coffee. "That's what I like about you. Always working. You know, I checked on your company. Can't find much. No invoices, no employer records. Hell, not even a tax number. Strange, right?" Carter shrugged lightly. "Small outfit. Paperwork gets messy." Gray nodded as if satisfied, but his eyes didn't match his tone. "Messy can get people hurt. Be careful what you dig up around here. Sometimes folks mistake curiosity for guilt." When Carter left the office, he knew the confrontation had been deliberate. Gray was toying with him, testing how far he'd run. By midday, the deputies were following his truck openly, not even pretending otherwise. He drove to the edge of town, turned onto a dirt road, and stopped near a cluster of abandoned mining sheds. There he hid the real evidence, the hard drive and copies of his recordings, beneath a pile of rusted scrap. He marked the spot with a loose metal sign, then wiped his fingerprints from the drive casing. If things went bad, this would be his only insurance. That evening, he tried once more to contact the Bureau. He used a portable uplink, bypassing local towers, encrypting the signal through a private VPN. This time a response came through, a short metallic ping and a single message. "Proceed with caution. Reinforcements delayed." It was unsigned, unverified. He didn't know who had sent it. It could have been the Bureau, or it could have been someone inside the sheriff's network pretending to be them. The uncertainty was almost worse than the silence. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by the glare of headlights passing outside the trailer. At one point, he thought he heard the crunch of boots on gravel, the soft jingle of a holster strap. He gripped the gun hidden beneath his pillow and waited, every sense straining. But no one entered. When he finally drifted into uneasy rest, the nightmares were filled with the same image, the ledger's torn pages fluttering through empty hands. Morning brought no peace. He stepped outside to find 2 patrol cars parked at the edge of the trailer park. The deputies pretended to check the perimeter fence, but kept their eyes fixed on him. One of them gave a mock salute. Carter returned inside and packed quickly. If Gray wanted him cornered, he'd have to move before the trap closed completely. He decided to drive north to the next county line, where he could find an independent station to send his evidence through. But as he reached the main road, red and blue lights flashed behind him. The siren came next, short and sharp. He pulled over, heart hammering. 2 deputies approached, hands on their belts. "License and registration," one said. Carter handed them over without protest. The deputy glanced at the papers, then smiled. "These look fake. Step out of the vehicle." Carter froze. "What's the charge?" "Forgery, maybe fraud. We'll sort it out downtown." He knew resistance would make things worse. He stepped out slowly, hands raised. They cuffed him roughly, ignoring his calm voice. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You don't know who I am." The deputy leaned close enough for him to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "We know exactly who you are, Agent Reed." The words hit harder than the shove that followed. They threw him into the back of the cruiser and drove in silence. Through the window, Carter saw familiar faces watching as they passed. Shopkeepers, the waitress, the mechanic. No one spoke, no one intervened. Fear had sealed their lips long ago. At the station, they processed him like any other criminal. Mugshot, fingerprints, personal effects bagged and tagged. His phone, his ID, even his wallet all taken. The charge sheet read, possession of forged documents, resisting arrest, impersonation of a federal officer. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so precise. They'd flipped his truth into their lie. Gray appeared after an hour, the image of composure. Rough day, huh? He said, leaning against the bars of the holding cell. Seems we've got a situation. Says here you've been posing as an FBI agent. Big crime in a small town? Carter met his gaze evenly. You know that's not true. Gray chuckled. Truth's what people believe, son. And right now, they believe me. He slid a folder through the bars, a printed dossier filled with fabricated reports, false employment records, even a psychiatric evaluation labeling Carter as delusional. See, I did some digging too. Turns out you've been under observation for unstable behavior. Thought you were helping the feds, but really you've been chasing ghosts. Sad story, really. Carter flipped through the papers, bile rising in his throat. The documents looked authentic, watermarked, notarized, complete with forged bureau letterheads. Whoever had made them had access to internal systems. It wasn't just local corruption anymore. Someone higher up was feeding Gray the tools to destroy him. Who's backing you? Carter asked quietly. Gray smiled without answering. Tell you what, you sign this confession, say you falsified your credentials, admit you've been under stress, and I'll see to it you walk out of here. No record, no trouble. You can even keep your truck. Sound fair? Carter looked at the pen on the table. One signature, and he could walk away. One lie, and he'd live. For a long moment, he considered it. Then he pushed the paper back. No deal. Gray sighed, theatrically disappointed. Pride's a dangerous thing. He stood, motioned to the deputies. Book him. Let him sit a while. Maybe he'll see sense. They threw Carter into a small concrete cell at the far end of the corridor. The door clanged shut, echoing like a final verdict. Hours passed. No water, no food. He used the silence to think, replaying every step of his investigation, every message sent, every gap in communication. Somewhere a leak had fed his reports to the very people he was trying to expose. Someone inside the bureau had betrayed him. When night came, the cell door opened unexpectedly. A young deputy he hadn't seen before slipped inside. You need to get out, she whispered. They're planning to move you, make it look like a transfer to county jail. You won't make it there alive. She handed him a small device, barely larger than a key fob. I found this in your things. Tracker. You can activate it manually. Carter studied her face, searching for deception. Why are you helping me? She hesitated. Because he killed my brother. Said it was self-defense. It wasn't. Before he could respond, she was gone. 10 minutes later, another deputy arrived with shackles and orders to transport the prisoner. They pulled Carter out, cuffed his wrists and ankles, and led him toward the garage. As they walked past the front desk, he stumbled deliberately, pressing his thumb against the tracker's trigger hidden in his palm. The light blinked, one signal sent. He didn't know who would receive it anymore, but it was all he had left. The van ride was long and silent. Outside, the desert stretched black and endless. The deputies said nothing, their faces blank behind mirrored glasses even in the dark. After half an hour, the van turned off the main road onto gravel. No lights ahead, no buildings. The realization hit him like ice. This wasn't a transfer. This was an execution. They stopped near an abandoned barn, headlights slicing through the dust. The driver opened the back door, weapon drawn. End of the line, agent, he said, mocking the title. Carter moved faster than training, faster than fear. He kicked the man's knee out, grabbed the gun, and fired once into the dirt as a warning. The flash blinded them long enough for him to run. Bullets whined past his ears as he dove behind a tractor rusting in the field. The cuffs on his ankles slowed him, but adrenaline gave him wings. He crawled through dry brush until he reached a ditch, breath ragged, blood seeping from a graze on his shoulder. The van's engine roared to life again, searching. He waited until the sound faded, then pulled himself onto the road. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. He staggered toward the faint glow of town lights, every step driven by fury more than strength. By dawn, he made it to an abandoned motel on the outskirts, collapsed behind a broken vending machine, and passed out. When he woke, the world was bright and cruel. His shoulder burned, his throat felt raw. But the tracker had done its job. A single text blinked on his phone, which he'd retrieved from the deputy before the escape. Signal received. Backup compromised. Proceed with caution. No name. No signature. Only confirmation that someone, somewhere, still knew he existed. He tore a strip from his shirt to bandage the wound, then limped to a payphone outside the motel. The line crackled as he dialed the only number he trusted anymore, one that didn't belong to the bureau. Maya Sanders, answered a calm voice on the other end. She sounded exactly as he remembered from her investigative podcast's Measured Alert. Who is this? This is Agent Carter Reed. I need your help. There was a pause, then a shift in her tone. You're the one from Echo Ridge. Yes, and I'm running out of time. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was calculation. Tell me everything, she said. Carter leaned against the wall, eyes scanning the empty horizon. They've turned the system against me, he said. They own the police, the courts, maybe even the bureau. I have proof, but I can't trust my own people anymore. Then we take it public, Maya replied. All of it. Her voice was steady, like an anchor thrown into chaos. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to relief. You'll need to be careful, he warned. They kill to keep this buried. I've had worse threats, she said. Send me everything you have. Carter took a slow breath. I will, but first I need to make sure it's still safe. As he hung up, the payphone receiver trembled in his hand. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also cleared the fog. There was no turning back now. The storm he'd felt brewing was here, and it would either destroy him or burn the corruption to the ground. He stepped into the heat of the morning, the desert stretching wide and merciless before him. His blood dried stiff against his sleeve, but his resolve hardened with it. They'd tried to erase him. Now he would make himself impossible to forget. Echo Ridge was about to hear his truth and the world with it. The sun had barely risen when Carter Reed crossed the state highway on foot, his clothes stiff with dried blood and desert dust. The town of Echo Ridge shimmered in the distance, deceptively peaceful. The events of the night still burned behind his eyes, the gunfire, the chase, the betrayal. His body was bruised and aching, but his mind was sharper than ever. Everything that had happened had stripped him of illusion. There was no one left to call, no chain of command to rely on, no backup coming through that static-filled radio. The only thing that could destroy the network of corruption was the truth itself, unleashed into the open, unfiltered, untamed. When he reached the motel where he had hidden his supplies, he found it empty, silent, as if it had been abandoned for years instead of days. A single light flickered in the office window. He slipped inside, found the small cache of equipment he had buried under the floorboards. His laptop, 2 encrypted drives, and a small satellite hotspot he'd built himself out of old military hardware. Everything still worked. It was enough to make contact with Maya Sanders again. The connection was poor, the screen pixelated, but her face appeared sharp, determined, framed by a cluttered newsroom backdrop. Carter, you look like hell, she said quietly. Feels worse, he replied, lowering himself into a chair. I sent you part of the data. Financial transfers, property deeds, surveillance footage. There's more, but it's buried. They'll come for it soon. Yama, they already are, Maya said. I've had 2 different men try to ask about you. No credentials, just threats. Whatever you've uncovered, it's big, bigger than you think. I know, Carter said, and I can't run anymore. We take it public, live, everything at once. Maya frowned. If you go on record, you'll paint a target on your back. You realize that? Carter gave a small, humorless smile. The target's already there. Let's make it worth something. They planned for days, working across encrypted channels and burner phones. Carter sent her every file he could recover, every photograph, every timestamp. She cross-checked it with independent sources, financial reporters, digital forensics experts, a few sympathetic attorneys still willing to risk their careers. Slowly, the puzzle came together. The sheriff's department was funneling seized assets and trafficking payments through a network of shell corporations tied to federal border contracts. The profits flowed upward to the mayor, the district attorney, and a regional supervisor in the FBI's southwestern office. It was a perfect circle of complicity, guarded by silence and intimidation. Maya secured airtime through an independent news outlet known for its live exposés. "We'll broadcast through our own servers," she said. "No corporate filters, no time delay. Once it's out there, no one can pull it back." Carter nodded. "Then we do it." The night before the broadcast, he sat in the motel room, lit only by the glow of the laptop screen. He watched the files again, the grainy videos of migrants being herded into trucks, the ledger entries labeled as community improvement, the photographs of officials shaking hands at ribbon-cutting ceremonies for projects that never existed. Each image was a wound, a reminder of how deep the rot went. He thought of the people he'd met, the waitress who stopped speaking to him out of fear, the mechanic whose shop had burned down, the young deputy who'd risked her life to warn him. Their faces merged into one, the face of a town held hostage. He promised himself that by tomorrow the hostage-takers would have nowhere left to hide, but the enemy was still moving. Late that night, the rumble of engines broke the stillness. He looked out the window and saw the faint glint of headlights approaching. 3 vehicles, 2 patrol trucks, and a black SUV. He killed the lights and ducked low, reaching for his gun. The vehicles stopped near the motel's entrance. Men got out. Gray's deputies, armed and methodical. They fanned out wordlessly, moving toward the rooms. Carter knew they weren't here to arrest him. They were here to erase him. He slipped out the back, climbing through a window into the dry creek bed that ran behind the building. The night air was cold and sharp against his face. He crawled low, feeling the ache in his shoulder pulse with each movement. From the direction of the motel came the muffled sound of shattering glass, then the roar of flames. They were burning the place, burning the evidence. The glow reflected off the sand like dawn. He ran until his lungs burned, until the noise faded behind him. When he stopped miles away, he could still see the orange bloom of fire on the horizon. By morning, he reached an old service station long abandoned to the desert. Inside, he found an old payphone still connected to a working line. He called Maya using the code they had agreed upon. "They hit the motel," he said. "I saw," she replied. "It's all over local feeds. Suspect dies in explosion? They're saying it was you." Carter let out a bitter laugh. "Then I guess I'm free. Free enough to finish this," she said. "We go live at 6. You'll speak first. Tell your story. I'll cue the evidence. Can you get somewhere safe before then?" "Awesome." "There's no safe left," he said simply. "Just time." The hours before the broadcast passed in a haze of exhaustion and clarity. Carter found an old diner with a functioning Wi-Fi signal and sat at the corner booth, hood pulled low. He ate nothing, drank black coffee that tasted like metal. Across the counter, the television played the local news. Sheriff Gray speaking at a press conference, his voice full of confidence and controlled outrage. "We believe this man, Carter Reed, fabricated evidence and endangered innocent officers. He suffered from mental instability and may have been responsible for multiple arsons, including last night's tragic fire. We ask for prayers for the victims and for the truth to prevail." Carter turned off the screen. The hypocrisy no longer angered him. It only strengthened his resolve. He opened his laptop, logged into the secure feed Maya had set up. Thousands of viewers were already waiting in the pre-broadcast lobby. Journalists, activists, ordinary citizens, curious about the rumors circulating online. The world was ready for the truth. At precisely 6 o'clock, the feed went live. Maya appeared first, calm and unflinching. "Good evening," she said into the camera. "What you're about to see comes directly from an active federal investigation into corruption and human trafficking in the American Southwest. The following footage has been verified and timestamped. The man speaking tonight is a federal agent currently in hiding. His testimony may change everything you think you know about law enforcement in this region." Carter took a deep breath and stepped into the frame. His face was tired but steady, his voice low and deliberate. "My name is Special Agent Carter Reed. For the past 6 months, I've been operating undercover in the town of Echo Ridge, Arizona. My mission was to investigate disappearances and financial irregularities tied to border operations. What I found was a network of corruption involving local authorities, elected officials, and federal supervisors. The evidence you'll see tonight was collected by me personally. It shows that the people sworn to protect our laws have been breaking them for profit." As he spoke, the footage rolled, grainy images of deputies escorting bound migrants into unmarked trucks, records of bank transfers linking the sheriff's department to shell companies, emails between the district attorney's office and the FBI regional bureau. Maya's team synchronized the evidence with his narration, building an unbroken chain of proof. The chat feed exploded with reactions: shock, anger, disbelief, support. Within minutes, the stream reached over 500,000 viewers. But even as the truth spread across the internet, danger closed in around him. Through the diner window, Carter saw 2 patrol cars cruise slowly down the street, their lights off. His hand drifted toward the pistol under the table. Though he knew he couldn't fight his way out, all he could do was keep talking. When the last clip finished, the one showing Gray personally signing off on the illegal transfers, Maya's voice returned. "Sheriff Gray and his associates have been notified of these allegations. Federal authorities have been alerted to the evidence you've seen tonight. We are live, and this feed cannot be stopped." Carter looked directly into the camera. "If I disappear after this, know that everything you've seen is real. Don't let them bury it again." The transmission ended with his face frozen mid-sentence, the look of defiance immortalized on a million screens. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. He shut the laptop, grabbed his bag, and slipped out the back door as the first cruiser pulled into the parking lot. He ran through the alleyways, cutting across empty lots toward the edge of town. The sound of engines grew louder behind him. He reached the highway, breath burning in his throat. Then in the distance, he saw flashing lights, but not red and blue, white and gold. Different pattern, different rhythm, federal. The vehicle screeched to a halt beside him. Agents in dark jackets poured out, weapons drawn. For one terrifying moment, he didn't know if they were friend or foe. Then one of them shouted, "Agent Reed, on your knees!" The voice was crisp, unfamiliar, and federal. Relief hit him so hard he almost laughed. He obeyed, hands raised. The agents surrounded him, checked his ID, and exchanged quick glances. "We got the signal from your tracker," one said. "You're lucky you turned it on when you did. Your case just went viral. Washington wants you protected." "Gray?" Carter asked. "Already in custody," the agent said, "along with 3 deputies and the mayor. The Bureau's Internal Affairs Division is cleaning house." Carter felt his legs weaken. For the first time in months, the weight lifted from his chest. But victory felt strange, quiet, almost unreal. He sat in the back of the federal SUV as they drove him out of town, watching the lights of Echo Ridge fade behind him. The diner, the streets, the crooked sign that said safe, strong, proud all, swallowed by darkness. Maya called later that night. "We did it," she said softly. "The broadcast's been mirrored on every major outlet. They can't hide it anymore. Gray's network is unraveling by the hour." Carter leaned back against the seat, exhaustion washing over him. "It's not over," he said, "but it's a start." "You'll need to testify," Maya added. "You're the key witness now. They'll try to discredit you again." "They can try," he said, "but the truth's out there now. It's bigger than me." He ended the call and closed his eyes. The car hummed softly beneath him, carrying him away from the place that had nearly killed him. He thought of the people still living there, the ones who had been too afraid to speak. Maybe now they would. Maybe now the silence would finally break. For the first time since this began, Carter allowed himself to breathe without fear. He didn't know what came next, whether the system he'd exposed could ever be rebuilt, or whether the scars would run too deep. But he knew this much. The world had seen Echo Ridge for what it was. The illusion was gone. And somewhere beyond the horizon, dawn began to rise again, clean and relentless, burning away the last of the shadows. The convoy of federal vehicles left Echo Ridge behind, just as dawn broke over the desert, painting the world in the pale gold of a new beginning. Carter Reed sat in the back of one of the SUVs, his hands resting on his knees, a thin bandage wrapped around his shoulder. The exhaustion that gripped him was not only physical, but something deeper, heavier, born from months of deception, fear, and the weight of truth finally freed. The agent sitting beside him scrolled through a tablet, scanning the flood of news reports and social media reactions. Every channel was showing the same images: the warehouse, the ledgers, the arrests. Echo Ridge was no longer a quiet town hidden behind its own borders. It was a national scandal. Carter stared out the window, watching the desert roll by. The endless flat land dotted with the wreckage of old fences and dying mesquite trees. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. The world knew his name, his face, his story. Yet even as relief tried to settle in, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unfinished still waited for him. When they reached the federal field office in Phoenix, reporters were already gathered outside the gates. Cameras flashed as the convoy turned in, their lenses catching fragments of his face through the tinted glass. He could almost hear the headlines forming. Whistleblower agent exposes border corruption. Small-town sheriff behind trafficking ring. He wondered how many of those same people would have called him a liar a week ago. The agents escorted him through the lobby and up to a secured floor, where Internal Affairs had set up a temporary base of operations. He spent the next 10 hours giving testimony recounting every detail from the day he arrived in Echo Ridge to the moment of the live broadcast. His words were recorded, transcribed, verified, cross-checked against the evidence he had collected. By the time the sun set, he felt hollowed out, as if every word he'd spoken had taken a part of him with it. When the final recorder clicked off, the lead investigator, a tall woman named Evelyn Cho, leaned forward. "Agent Reed, I won't lie to you. What you've done has saved lives and exposed a network we didn't even know existed. But you've also made enemies, powerful ones. We'll have to keep you under protection until the trial." Carter nodded, too tired to argue. "Do what you have to. I just want to make sure it sticks." "Oh, it will stick," Cho said. "Gray's already cooperating partially. The district attorney flipped this afternoon. We have the chain of custody, the bank trails, the offshore accounts. You handed us everything we needed. The Bureau will make this right." He wanted to believe her. He really did. But after everything that had happened, trust came hard. Still, he signed the final forms and followed the agents to the safe house on the outskirts of the city, a small, nondescript building with security cameras and bulletproof windows. That night, as he lay on the narrow bed, sleep came slowly. He kept thinking of the people in Echo Ridge, of the faces that had watched him pass in silence. Were they safe now? Or would the power that had fed on them simply grow new heads elsewhere? Justice was a fragile thing, easily promised, rarely kept. The following morning, the headlines were relentless. Corruption ring spanning multiple states uncovered. Sheriff Gray arrested in human trafficking scandal. FBI launches internal investigation after leaks. Every story featured his name, his image. He had become the unwilling face of justice. When Maya called, her voice carried a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "You did it, Carter. They're already talking about reforms, special oversight, independent task forces. You lit the fuse." He gave a quiet laugh. "Feels more like I started a fire I can't control." "Maybe that's what it needed," she said. "Sometimes you have to burn it down to rebuild it." Over the next weeks, the machine of justice moved with surprising speed. Trials were scheduled. Testimonies were subpoenaed. Carter appeared before Congress in closed session, detailing the failures that allowed corruption to grow unchecked. His words were measured but unflinching. "The system protects itself," he told them, "until someone refuses to be silent. We need transparency, accountability, protection for whistleblowers, not just policies on paper, but enforcement that matters." The room was silent when he finished. Even the senators who had looked at him with skepticism now seemed to see the weight behind his words. When he stepped out into the hallway afterward, Maya was waiting. She had been covering every development for her network, and the stories she published had become the pulse of the unfolding reckoning. "They listened," she said softly as they walked together. "I think they finally get it." Carter gave a tired smile. "We'll see if they still get it when the cameras are gone." Back in Echo Ridge, life had already begun to shift. Gray's deputies were being replaced by state-appointed officers. The mayor had resigned. A task force was combing through every record, every property deal, every shadowy fund. The town that once lived under silence now buzzed with cautious hope. Weeks later, Carter returned not as an undercover agent, not as a fugitive, but as the man who had dragged its secrets into the light. The drive there felt different this time. The road no longer seemed like a path into enemy territory, but a bridge to something redeemed. When he arrived, the people watched him with a mixture of recognition and gratitude. The same waitress who had once avoided his eyes greeted him at the diner with a nervous smile. "Coffee's on the house," she said. "Guess we owe you that much." He thanked her, taking a seat by the window where the morning light poured in. Outside, children were playing near the church steps. The sheriff's office across the street stood quiet, its windows newly replaced, the badge removed from the wall. A woman emerged from the building, a tall, dark-haired veteran of the state police who had been appointed the new sheriff. She walked with a steadiness that came from surviving her own battles. Carter had read her file. She'd once blown the whistle on an abusive superior and been forced into early retirement. Now she was back, not as a victim, but as the symbol of change. She crossed the street and entered the diner. "Agent Reed," she said, offering her hand. "Sheriff Lisa Ramirez. I believe I owe you the cleanup of a lifetime." He shook her hand, smiling faintly. "You've got your work cut out for you." "Maybe," she said, sliding into the booth opposite him, "but at least now we know where to start. I read your reports. It's hard to believe one town could fall that far." "It didn't happen overnight," Carter said. "It happens one compromise at a time. People look the other way because they're tired or scared or think it doesn't matter, until it's too late." Ramirez nodded slowly. "We're not letting it happen again." For the next few days, Carter stayed in Echo Ridge, helping the transition team organize files, recover evidence, and train the new officers on proper procedures. It was strange being back walking through streets that once felt like traps and now felt almost peaceful. At night, he visited the edge of town where the warehouse once stood. It was gone now, burned to its foundation. In its place, construction crews were clearing the ground for a memorial park. A small plaque already stood there, engraved with the names of the missing whose bodies had been recovered. He stood before it for a long time, the desert wind tugging at his jacket. "You're free now," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to them or himself. When he returned to Phoenix, the Bureau offered him a new position, lead investigator, for a newly formed internal integrity unit. It would oversee corruption cases within law enforcement itself, answerable only to federal oversight committees. "You'll have autonomy," Director Cho said, "full authority to choose your team. We need someone who's proven they won't look away." Carter hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I'll do it. But it can't just be another department buried under paperwork. It has to mean something." "It will," she said, "because you'll make sure it does." The months that followed were a blur of work assembling a team, reviewing cases, meeting survivors, coordinating with agencies too afraid to admit their failures. It was exhausting, often thankless, but every file he opened felt like one more step toward reclaiming what justice was supposed to be. Maya's stories kept the public's attention alive, her broadcast sharp and unrelenting. "Transparency isn't just truth," she said once during an interview. "It's memory. It's what keeps lies from growing back." Nearly a year after the fall of Echo Ridge, Carter returned one last time. The town looked different, cleaner, brighter, though the scars were still there if you knew where to look. The diner had new owners. The trailer park had been renovated into affordable housing. At the memorial park, flowers surrounded the bronze statue of a single open hand, palm facing upward. Beneath it, the inscription read, "Justice is the echo that never fades." He walked through the park until he reached the bench overlooking the desert. The horizon stretched wide, endless, just as it had the first day he arrived. But now the silence wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. He thought of everyone who had paid the price for this peace. The ones who had vanished, the ones who had spoken too late, the ones who had finally found the courage to stand up. He sat down, letting the heat sink into his skin, and closed his eyes. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Didn't think I'd see you back here?" It was Maya, camera slung over her shoulder, her hair caught in the wind. "You disappeared after DC. The world's been wondering what happened to you. I've been busy, he said with a faint grin, and tired of talking. She sat beside him, looking out at the horizon. You know, I think this place is going to make it. People talk now. They don't whisper anymore. That's good, Carter said softly. That's how healing starts. She studied him for a moment. You still don't trust the system, do you? He shook his head. No, but I trust people. Some of them at least. That's enough for now. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light shift across the sand. The world would move on soon as it always did, finding new scandals, new stories. But Echo Ridge would remain a reminder of what happens when fear rules and what it costs to break that rule. When the sun dipped low, Carter stood. I have to go, he said. Work never stops. Maya smiled. You've earned a rest, you know. Maybe someday, he said, but not yet. He started walking toward his truck parked near the road. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky was clear. As he opened the door, he looked back once more at the town, the place that had tried to destroy him, and in the end, made him who he was. Then he drove off, the desert swallowing the sound of the engine. As the highway stretched before him, endless and shimmering, Carter Reed felt something rare and fleeting, peace mixed with purpose. The world was broken, yes, but not beyond repair. Justice, he had learned, wasn't a destination, but a struggle renewed every day, a promise you had to keep making even when no one else would. And somewhere behind him, in a small Arizona town reborn from its own ashes, that promise still echoed. If this story pulled you in, don't stop here. Subscribe now and stay with us for the next investigations, new stories, and behind-the-scenes looks into the dark corners of power. Hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Share this video. Let others hear the truth. Because sometimes spreading the story is the fight for justice.